plugin of the week is the Waves Cobalt Saphira. Now, this is actually a new plugin by Waves, and it's going to be part of a series, the Cobalt series, excuse me. And the first one in that series is called Saphira. So what Waves has done is actually a really, really smart thing, because what they've done is they've spent a lot of time and energy in working on emulation technology. And one of the more difficult things in working with emulation technology is actually capturing the harmonic distortion characteristics. So if you follow any of my classes and follow any of my teachers, I talk a lot about harmonic distortion and what it comes from. So understanding a little bit about what harmonics actually are is they're sort of multiples of a given frequency. Now, there's a couple ways: numerical, whole number numerical multiples, or what I sometimes prefer is like an additive. So, for example, if you had like if a bass player plays an A, I can't remember whether it's an A1, which is 110 cycles, or A2, right? So if you play 110, then the first harmonic would be 220, but then it would be 330, then 440. So when you just do a multiplicative double, it's like an octave from a musical perspective. It's also a harmonic, but basically it becomes like an additive thing. So you keep adding 110 to the number and you're kind of running up the harmonic series. And that's the basic idea. Now, there's some weird things with the numbers when you work on it. So, and without getting into the math or why, or, getting into the whole basic thing, like if you think of the fundamental as basically harmonic number one, that would be, your starting place. So the first harmonic right up above that would actually be an even harmonic, and then it would go to odd, then it would go to even, then it would go to odd, and it would kind of go back and forth as you're going up the line. So what you'll see in some of the display information that's shown here, you'll see some basic stuff about it. So let me just kind of zoom in here a little bit, and then let's take a close look at the plugin and kind of get an idea of what they've done. So they've included a number of things from all of their emulation technologies. What you have is an even harmonics and odd harmonics. Even harmonics giving you a bit more of an edgy kind of sound. Odd harmonics giving you more of a warmth characteristic. And it's hard to describe any other way than that, because when you actually work with it, it's a feeling sensation, and you kind of have to work with it from that perspective. So when they talk about edge and warmth, it's more of a feeling thing, and you kind of have to roll with it a little bit and kind of understand the perspective of it. But it's really smart the way that they've actually done this. So what you have is you have the input signal actually comes in, and it splits off, and it splits off twice, one going into the even harmonics engine, the other going into the odd harmonics engine. And what you have is a send, and the send level drives into the harmonics. So the more you actually drive, it's sort of like pushing into an analog component. The more signal you push into it, the more harmonic distortion you're going to get. You're going to kind of hit a wall with it as well, so that you're kind of overdriving it and determining how much you're driving that harmonic component. So all analog components, to varying degrees, create forms of harmonic distortion. You've always seen like things like total harmonic distortion, THD, and this would be the total of harmonic distortion based off of the quality of components. So when you get into higher quality components, those harmonics are either better sounding or they're significantly less. So you get sort of a clarity and kind of an openness. But there's a character to this which still drives people back to analog sound and analog plug-in emulations and things like that, and back to analog equipment, because there is something, a characteristic that's pleasing that we're used to. And that's kind of part of what this plugin kind of brings in. So we have these two things, two sends. So the signal comes in, it splits. One goes into here, you have a send, you drive it for a certain amount, and then you bring the amount of that, or you swing how much of that you want mixed in with the signal. And that's basically what works here. And then you have the odd harmonics, which is the warmth. You drive that however much you want, and then you have a return level that you mix in. So the signal splits. Now you have a dry signal feeding across. You have an odd harmonics that gets mixed in. You have an even harmonics that gets mixed in. And then you also have an engine here, which is the tape engine. So this is actually something which more or less emulates some of the nonlinear components of working with an analog tape, and in particular working with sort of a wow flutter type of characteristic. Analog tape exhibits many types of things. It exhibits a modulation distortion, which is the couple of factors that go into that. On the analog tape, the consistency of the number of magnetic oxide particles on any given part of the tape is never going to be even. So there's going to be kind of a level variation, a fuzziness that's kind of mixed in. And then you also have the variations of the speed of the tape pulling through and any variations due to very subtle thicknesses in the tape or inconsistencies in the motor mechanism. And that's more or less what you have kind of driving in here. So what we're doing is we're mixing in some of these components. Now, what I have is this on the mix bus. If you look at the documentation, they talk about this not so much in terms of its use on individual tracks, although you can use it that way, but it tends to work a little bit more effectively with more complex things, like on a whole mix or on a mix stem, where you might want to put it on like all of your drums and percussion, put it on all your instrumentation, put it on a vocal, with all the effects kind of feeding into it, or put it on a whole mix bus. And that's the way I'm going to demonstrate it here. So when we work with it, we have send and return levels. We can turn these sections on or off. So I'll kind of show you some different ways of working with it. And then you have harmonic modes. So you have harmonic modes A, B, through G, right? A through G. And as you go through them, the way that they kind of flag them is these are more natural. A, C, and D are more natural sounding. So you can see that there's a more consistent number of harmonics that kind of pass through. C has a little bit more of a punchy kind of aspect, only adding in first and second harmonics. And then as we're kind of going through here, then we have more gritty sounds. So you can't necessarily go by the way that these things go. They will actually change and gain as you kind of send and bring your returns in and out. So basically you can kind of work into different harmonic characteristics and kind of blend it accordingly. So before we get to this, what's even cooler about all this stuff, which makes it unique, is that the edge and warmth also has an EQ that you can add in. So as you kind of work through these individual presets, in addition to changing the actual number of harmonics and kind of what you're working with, you have the ability to shape that even more by playing with the equalization of the way that those harmonics are kind of blended back in. So this gives you a lot of control and variation over it. So this is something that's very unique. So you have a full 4-band EQ that you can kind of work with to kind of play with those aspects of it. And then we have a tape speed, which kind of adds some depth in. So this is actually a really cool mastering tool. I think one of the things, or a mix bus tool, because what it does is it helps you to bring depth into something. So you follow a lot of things. I talk a lot about depth and clarity and being able to kind of see into the mix or feel like not just like that all the sounds are balanced and the frequency and all that sort of stuff is even, but that you can kind of feel some three-dimensional aspect to the sound. Like it extends forward from the speakers and behind the speakers, and it's not just flat in front of them. And it's important that you listen from that perspective. And if you listen from that perspective, you're more likely going to be able to hear exactly what this is doing, because it can be subtle. And so I'm going to make it maybe not so subtle, just so you can kind of hear a little bit of what's going on. So we'll start with an A harmonic setting, and I'm just going to kind of push a little bit of the edge harmonics and kind of show you one way to kind of deal with it. So maybe we'll start by mixing and just having a little bit of audio kicking in here. So I'm going to do this just instrumental so I can talk over it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive up the return here so you can really hear what's going on with this. And as I step through, so the reason why I do this is not like that's where it's going to end up being, but just to kind of exaggerate so you can kind of hear what it's about. So in other words, if I'm driving this, I may want to kind of bring up the return so I can exaggerate how it is, what the vibe is or what the sound is, and then I can pull this back and mix it in. So when I mix it in that way, you know, like it has like just a very subtle kind of presence that it's adding into it, which is kind of cool. Now I can do the same type of thing here with the warmth, and let's kind of drive this a little bit. So I want to see how much I want to drive it here. Back it off, and now I can kind of mix it in here. Sometimes you have to give yourself a little bit of a breather. So notice the way that focus on the way that it images the low end. Now let's add in the edge along with it. Okay, little CPU issue. So we can see how just this on its own kind of brings in a little bit of depth. Actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of kick right in, move this over here just to a section where we can hear this a little bit more clearly. So kind of swing this over here by the plugin so I can kind of move from section to section. So there's one other aspect that I want to kind of bring in here, and this is the tape emulation. And I'll kind of go through a couple of different things and show you how you can kind of work this. So if you follow the kind of processing here is push it so that you can get a feel for how you're actually driving it. So the more that you sort of drive the send, think of it as like you're sort of hitting a wall, almost more like a compressor. And so you're trying to figure out like that balance where it's giving you maybe the excitement or what it is that you're looking for, the edge without necessarily just being muddy distortion. You know, so there's like some kind of balance, and every different mix or whatever it is, or stem that you kind of feed into it is going to respond a little bit differently. And then, you know, maybe you max out the return, but so when you pull it out and kind of blend it back in, give yourself a second, because sometimes you get your ears get used to hearing it a certain way. You might have a tendency to over push it. So get, you know, sort of settle yourself back in and then blend it back in. And then as you mix it in, sometimes you could just do it blind, like close your eyes and kind of mix it in until you get the right feel or the right vibe to it. And the differences or the things that you hear are not so much that it's shifting tonal character, which you can get a little bit of that, which you actually can, you know, if you start to really push it, you can start to drive more of those sorts of things. But a feeling or a sensation of depth, presence, more three-dimensional character. And this is kind of, I think, where the tape kind of shines a little bit most effectively. So like with all the others here, if I drive this all the way up, I can work with different tape speeds. So I'm cranking up the depth here. And this is going to create a little bit of a warbly unevenness. So you have standard tape speeds of 7.5, 15, 30, and then the numbers in between. So you really hear it there on that keyboard. Okay, so exaggerating it, I kind of like the 11.25. So now I'm not going to have the depth all the way up here. This is something that I'm going to mix in a little bit more subtly. So the idea or the feeling that you should get when you're listening for this is a real like sense of like now this should kind of really bring in some dimension to the back end when you set it right. Like you really feel like as soon as I got to right there, like it started to open up. Just focus on the separation of the instruments. And now I can kind of mix in some of the different elements. So with this, like we've only got into the very basics of it, because as you start to kind of push through, like, so with all of this set up, I have just a simple, harmonic mode 1, and I just kind of, or A, and I kind of started off with that. I was going to toggle through a couple of the others just so you can kind of hear like some of this, because you can, you have to play with it a little bit, kind of work within certain things and see if it's giving you the characteristic that you want. If you want to compare it, then let's just kind of copy this over to the B setting, which is really great. And now let's just kind of work through a couple other options. That just opens up right away. So as you start to bring in more of the other harmonics, the upper harmonics, you can hear how this kind of starts to open up and affect more of the top end. Now, if that is a little bit too much and you want to kind of go somewhere in between, we could take sort of the edge harmonics here and kind of drive this a little bit more. Like actually there's a filter here on the top end. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just kind of shelve it and kind of pull it back, or maybe kind of pull this filter down a little bit here. Oh, it's actually, I'm sorry, that's a bell filter here. So I can also do, let me do it this way. Let me go to like a high pass here and kind of warm it up from that perspective. Kind of like the openness of it. And I could do the same with the warmth or the odd harmonics, where I can kind of balance that out or kind of open that up and treat that individually. So you can see how this gets into like a whole other thing. Now, the three that I selected here were all coming in on the A, B, and D, which are the more natural ones. So let's just kind of do a quick thing with one, a little bit more of an aggressive one here. So that's where we were with A. Now I also added in some things here, so let me just kind of do it from this perspective. So there, you're probably going to, if you're going to start with that, you're probably going to want to push or drive some of these things a little bit more. So that may not be the perfect example. Let's go to some of the grittier, dirtier ones. So you see this naturally is pushing odd harmonics. Or edge harmonics, I'm sorry, even harmonics. The numbers sort of throw you out. It's definitely more aggressive. That's where you really hear it getting gritty. So you can see here, just like, you know, when you start to really dig into all the possibilities with the equalization and then the different characteristics, you can kind of leave yourself with a lot of options, and you'll kind of find that maybe you gravitate towards certain things. Like maybe if you're going to something a little more alternative and heavier, as opposed to a little bit more slick and clean, along the lines of this mix, you can drive it more with E, F, and G or C, or go with a little bit more of a cleaner sound. And then every mix is going to need something different. So maybe if A is kind of giving you an overall warmer kind of characteristic, then maybe you start off with that on something that is maybe a little bit thinner and digital, and you're kind of trying to bring in more body or warmth. But what it does is it gives you a lot of tonal coloration or variations. This is a really powerful mastering tool when you kind of get right down to it, or a mix bus tool, because you can really shape in a very musical way some of the tonal and depth characteristics of the mix, which is always on a track-by-track basis is a difficult thing to achieve. And so that's what separates, people who are really, really good at mixing from people who just make good mixes, from people who are really great at it, is being able to capture that depth. Same with mastering engineers. The mastering engineers are the people that can really create openness and depth and make the music sort of escape the speakers or the headphones. That's the basic idea. Anyway, a really cool one. I really dig this one. It takes a little bit of kind of going through some steps to get used to it, but I think if you kind of really push some of the elements so that you really hear and feel what it's doing first, and then kind of swing it in, you'll start to get the hang of it. And really very powerful, useful tool for shaping a mix or a master. All right, there you have it. That's the Cobalt Saphira by Waves. So Saphira is the first in a line of Cobalt plugins, and look forward to seeing the new ones that'll be coming up and following hopefully soon.